freely roaming around major cities, shooting up rival gangs, manipulating various economies, and of course, stealing just about any vehicle that strikes your fancy are all wonderful things to be able to do in open-world action games. Minigames allow some or all of these things with varying degrees of success, but none of them bring all of them together quite as exquisitely as the Grand Theft Auto series does. From the first few overhead games in the mid-90s to the timelessly intriguing 3 criminal masterminds of GTA 5, the series has largely delivered outstanding experiences across the board that always seem to define their genre as well as their generation. Grand Theft Auto 4 was no exception. The game redefined what crime stories could be in video games, as well as what could be possible from a gameplay perspective. The Grand Theft Auto series had steadily developed with every release, each pillar of improvement being taller than the last. Grand Theft Auto 3 was a huge improvement from the top-down games of the 90s, and eventually the series would reach a peak for that era with San Andreas. The sheer size and amount of opportunity in that game was staggering, but Grand Theft Auto 4 stepped it up the most the series had ever seen, setting a new standard for the series against which countless open-world games would be measured for years. Shortly after the release of San Andreas, the core team that worked on Grand Theft Auto 3, as well as many other talented folks from other Rockstar projects, would come together to get to work on their greatest project yet. Vice City and San Andreas would be left behind for Liberty City, an analog for New York that was previously explored a little bit in GTA 3 and the PSP spin-off Liberty City Stories, but in GTA 4 it would exceed the previous games that took place there in both quantity and quality. Characters were more interesting, the story was way more complex, and ultimately it was just a better example of the genre than the previous entries. The main character, for example, Nico, was not only on a revenge mission that brought him to America, but he was also looking for a more nebulous type of change and evolution for himself that had not been seen in the main characters of the series prior. You learn about what this means to him as the game progresses and as you create that life for him. I won't give up too much of the story here, but let's just say that choice and consequence play into the experience in a huge way by the end, and the way you choose to play the end greatly impacts Nico's journey in a way that players were not at all ready for back in 2008. This expanded characterization made Nico far more compelling and relatable than most of the cardboard cutouts of pseudo-criminal protagonists the series had seen so far. Rockstar went to extreme lengths to create an engaging plot and pull outstanding performances out of their actors in Grand Theft Auto 4, and it all paid off with these complicated characters and their expertly written dialogue. While the story and characters were both insanely well crafted for the time, ultimately the star of the show in a Grand Theft Auto game is the incredibly well-designed world map that consisted of several large chunks of land and smaller mini islands, all with their own feel and characteristics that made them stand out from each other. While the world isn't technically larger than San Andreas' world map, at least in terms of square footage, it could easily feel that way with how it's cleverly divided up and having more fulfilling tasks and story moments crammed into it. The level of environmental detail and lighting effects also took advantage of the newer hardware, making 4 the best looking game in the series by a Liberty City mile, despite having a somewhat more drab color palette. This was a side effect of the decision to go into a more realistic, gritty direction than the previous games had seen, and while it would ultimately prove to be a somewhat divisive decision on the part of the developers, it did bring a certain amount of gravity and sobriety to the series that gamers would go on to expect from future games throughout the genre. Another area Rockstar went above and beyond for GTA 4 was the soundtrack. While the series had become known for excellent music and nice variety throughout the radio stations, this time they would go much further to acquire many tracks that really sold the tone of Liberty City, and even went so far as to pay thousands of dollars to real DJs and record labels to re-record some songs and make completely new ones that made references to Liberty City in order to give the player unprecedented immersion when flipping around to different radio stations. The action was also tightened up quite a bit with an excellent aiming and cover system that brought the series into the modern age as far as gunfights were concerned. Smaller little things like computers, televisions, and the character's cell phone are also expanded on to have way more content and functionality than was ever never even asked for, and that would serve to bring the whole do whatever you like feeling to life quite well. On top of that, mini games like bowling, darts, and pool are realized to the point where they could almost justify their own games. Grand Theft Auto 4 might have somewhat of a monotone exterior in some ways, but once you dove in, the sheer depth of the game was inescapably apparent in every area. For the ridiculous amount of effort that went into the game, Rockstar would release Grand Theft Auto 4 to an endless sea of acclaim. All of the meticulous detail and depth would pay off greatly in the form of perfect and nearly perfect scores from the vast majority of gaming news outlets and gamers alike. The unprecedented storytelling, insane amount of depth and detail, and the vastly upgraded combat and gameplay would culminate into one of the best open world action games of all time. Even now, well past a decade after its release and a clearly superior successor in Grand Theft Auto 5, the fourth game in the series is perhaps overshadowed and underappreciated more than it deserves to be. While the fifth game does outdo it in almost every way, it did take that one bold step into the world of realism for the series to make the GTA 5 and Red Dead Redemption 2 that we enjoy so much today even possible. The GTA series, as well as the open world action genre as a whole, owes a lot to Grand Theft Auto 4, and they will continue to well into the future of the medium. That's it for this video. If you enjoyed and would like to see more, feel free to hit that subscribe button and hit the notification bell to ensure you'll be notified when new videos go up.